Alrighty, welcome to Saturday night, and this is another live version of RadioVisions. I'm glad everybody's out there tonight and having a good time. This is Darrah, and tonight's going to be an interesting journey because it's going to be a little interesting, like I said, because tonight's topic is change. If you could change anything you wanted, what would it be? And the mode of doing the change, let's say, would be time travel. So if you could time travel to any point in time and change anything you would like, what would it be? Interesting topic, huh? Okay, so tonight's topic is time travel. Now, I've been a big fan of time travel ever since I can remember. I've also been accused of being a time traveler. That's within jest, I know, but I always thought the idea would be extraordinary if people could time travel. What would things be like? What would things not be like? One of the best and most unique things I think would happen is that humankind would learn so much that it would be scary. Well, stop and think about it. World War II might not have ever happened. World War I might not have never happened. If you live through it once and know what to change and you go back and change it, doesn't make it not happen. See, that there's the catch right there. Some people theorize that if you go back in time, you can't change anything, at least nothing major. Certain events have to happen in order for us to progress forward. And I agree with that to some degree. Now, these same theorists also say that you can change time and be a part of it, but only in minor ways. For instance, you can go back in time to visit your crazy great uncle. And come to find out when you meet him back in 1940, he wasn't crazy. And after you've met him, talk to him and tell him that you are from the future, you are his niece or nephew or whatever. And he ponders this for years and years and years to come. That drives him crazy. Therefore, you are the cause of him going crazy, and therefore, he is why that you grew up knowing him as your crazy uncle. Now, they say that you can't affect stuff like that. Cool, interesting. But what if you could go back and change events and you knew you could change them 100%? No ifs, ands, or buts. Would you do it? For instance, let's say you get married, have a couple kids, it's 30, 40 years later, you're still married, and all of a sudden you're faced with the fact that your spouse is no longer there, regardless if they left you or they died in an accident. You pick the reason why they're no longer there, but they're no longer there. And all you know is that it was painful, it hurt. And you went through the next 4 or 5 years blaming yourself for whatever the situation was, and blaming and blaming and blaming. Then out of the blue, someone comes up to you and goes, "Hey, I can send you back in time to any point you would like." Would you go back in time and change that event that made it so miserable? Or would you go back to the very beginning of it and not even deal with the event at all? Go back and not even get married, not even be in that situation. So that's tonight's topic. If you could change anything, what would it be? Would it be your own personal life? Would it be someone else's life? Would it be the course of the world? Would it be something as self-serving as I'm going to go back in time and make a lot of money? What would you do? How would you do it? And the biggest thing is time travel a one-way trip? Some people theorize that at this point in human time that we can physically time travel. Others are saying we can't because what we would need to physically time travel is just out of our reach. There's a group of people on that subject working on it right now so that physical matter will be able to go through time, and grantedly into the past only. So think about it. What would you change? If you could step into your magic little machine and go to any time in the past, where would it be? Would it be 2 weeks ago? Would it be 2 years ago? Would it be 200 years ago? Would it be 2,000 years ago? 2010 years ago? Think about it. The world's yours. So, okay, let's say you climb into your machine and you go back in time. And you do change some events. And then you are able to jump to the present day. Or which present day that you thought you left. When you jump back, is it the same present day that you left, or is it all different? Did you change just enough to alter minor things that when you got back, you would still have a family, friends, job, so on? Or did the little minor thing you changed end up being such a major thing when you jump back, your world that you left was gone? A lot of hypotheticals there. A lot of what ifs. And going back to, is it a one-way trip? Like I said, some people theorize that it is. If you can jump through time from one point to another point, it would be a one-way trip. Because the current technology that it would take to jump you back, let's say 20 years, wasn't there 20 years ago, so there's no way you can jump again. You may have the knowledge of it. You may even have the blueprints on you of it. But that doesn't mean the physical details or the physical hardware is yet invented yet. So that's why they're theorizing that if you could jump back in time, regardless what time period, you're stuck there. Now granted, if you're saying I'm going to jump back 2 weeks, yeah, you could probably build another machine and maybe get home. But as of now, they're just saying that you can only jump backwards in time. And some people are theorizing that if you could jump back in time, you can only jump back as far as your machine is. For instance, the current gentleman that's working on time travel is using lasers. And his hypothesis is, once they get their machine in place and turned on, they'll be able to send a particle back in time, which would be really cool. Now here's the kicker. They could set their machine up and say, okay, I'm going to set it to go back to 1947, which is great. But nobody in 1947 would notice it. Or it may not even show up there at all. Now, once they turn this machine on, they're going to have to leave it on 24/7. Kind of like a computer or a server is nowadays. Once you turn it on, you have to leave it on or it don't work. And his hypothesis is, using this laser technology to make this time travel possible, he'll be able to send a particle back, but only as far back as his machine is in existence. So if he builds his machine in 2008, and they don't turn it on until January 1st, 2009, anything from that point forward can jump back to that one point. And okay, if you don't follow that, let me put it this way. Okay, you turn the machine on in January 1st, 2009. And this machine is designed to run indefinitely. It will never break down, let's just say. And it will run forever and ever and ever because they've got it on some really amazing power grid that will allow it to do that. That would be cool. So now it is the year 2020. Machines still work and people are still using it and sending stuff back in time. Now since it's been 11 years, they could actually send that particle back in time from 2020 to 2009, and the people at 2009 can retrieve it out of the machine. Okay. Now, if they don't retrieve it out of the machine, does it go further back in time? And if so, is it just lost because there's no machines further back than that can access it? That's some of the current modern time travel jargon that's going on, and it's very real, I assure you. These people are actually working on it. And it's really amazing to think that it's a one-way trip. Because let's say you crawl in this machine and program whatever destination you want, whatever time period you want. Would you have enough nerve to crawl into it and go back there knowing once you got there that would be your present day? I don't know how many people would do that. Would you take the chance of doing it? Because for all intents and purposes, you would be born in, let's say, the 60s, grow up, and in the 2000s you climbed in this machine and disappeared into 1932 for whatever reason. That's the year you picked. For everybody that knew you, you would just simply have vanished from the face of the planet. Unless they knew what you were doing and knew where to look to find you. That means you went and ended up back in 1932, and you could talk to the people in the present day, 2000s, by putting articles in newspapers, doing simple little things like that, becoming part of history itself, being in the news, being on the radio, writing books, writing pamphlets, leaving things saying that you were there. Then current day people would have this information instantaneously. For instance, if you jump back, and to the people that knew you and watched you leave, they would start knowing where to find this information the same day you left, and would find it the same day you left. Even though you may have jumped into 1932 but didn't even start putting out information until 1940. You lived all those years there not doing anything, but to the present day person, all that information has been there for the last 60, 70, 80 years. Kind of makes you think, doesn't it? If time travel would be possible, would we as humans abuse it? Screw up our world we have now? I would like to think we wouldn't, but then at the same time, I got a feeling we probably would. An individual person may not, but whoever fully develops time travel, regardless if it's this century or in the next one or in the one after, I can guarantee whatever government is in place, they will take it. They will use it and transform it into some kind of weapon. Which is a really disturbing thought, thinking that time travel could be a weapon. But like I said earlier, if you could stop one of the major wars, or any war for that matter, would you do it? Would you stop World War I? World War II? Here's an hypothesis based on time travel that people have thought about for quite a while since World War II. And it goes back to the nerve of, if you could climb in the machine and go on a one-way trip, would you? If you took your one-way trip back to 1932, met up with the Hitler family before Hitler was in power, and let's say there was a car accident and Hitler suffered some major injuries and later died from him. Now, my question is, could you actually go back and be the cause of that accident that killed him, knowing that that war would never take place, or at least that version of the war would never take place? You'd be saving uncountable lives, uncountable, all the way around. But would nature let it happen? So many stories about it saying nature would never let it happen. Nature has a way of preserving itself. making some things happen for a reason, making other things not happen for a reason. I've got a funny feeling that if it was up to me and someone told me I could take a one-way trip, and that's what they'd slated for the trip, I didn't have a choice, I think I would take it. On the off chance, now this is why I would take it, on the off chance that I went back in time and knew for a fact that I was going to try to stop this war either by getting rid of the cause or some other means, I would go back, do my thing, and if I succeeded, the future would change instantaneously. There again, I'm stuck back wherever I am. Presumably, I lived, I'm still alive. Now, do I start leaving messages for my friends and family in the future in the newspapers and so on and so forth, like I said? Have them go and read the Saturday Evening Post, every weekend or whatever paper we had discussed before I left so they could know what was going on. Which would bring us to another story. I would have to go back in time, get a job in order to get money to place these ads in the paper. I mean, granted, I could jump back with enough currency to do it for a while, but since it was a one-way trip, I'd eventually have to get a job anyway because my currency would run out. And so therefore, does my family become wealthy because I kind of know what's coming up, or do I just lay low and try not to change anything else? So here's the kicker. Let's say I went back, did what I did, and either I succeeded or I didn't, but in either case, I died. Okay, I died. But since I wasn't born until the late 60s, and people knew what day I was going to leave, would that event just keep happening over and over and over again? Could someone from 1966 actually die in 1933 or 32? Some people say yes. Some people say no. What's your thoughts? So let me know what you think about this one. Change. Time travel. If you could change anything by time travel, would you do it? Would you have the nerve to do it? I know a lot of you out there are thinking to yourselves right off the bat, there is no way that I'd give anything up to go back and do it. And then there's the others out there that are saying, give me the chance, I'm there in a heartbeat. To be honest, I'm one of you. Now, I'm not necessarily going to do it for self-fulfillment. I would do it to be an observer, to go back and just look, see what's going on. I would also like to go back and, if I could make a difference, I would give it my all. That is pretty deep discussion, I know. But going back to the government taking over, if you could, whoever fully integrates time travel as a physical matter other than just particles, because right now what we are working with or what the scientists are working with as of time travel right now, it is just sending one particle of matter back in time. Now, one particle of matter is tinier than a head of a needle, okay? But you gotta understand that the matter they're sending back, because of the technology we have, we can actually put information in that sort of space and send it back. And if the past selves that retrieve it know how to open this package, so to speak, they can get information from the future. Now this is where it's going to get curious and interesting. So the government's involved. They want to use it as a weapon. And to me, the first thing they're going to do is take this, even if it's a particle they're sending back in time. They're going to take this particle and put everything they can information-wise in it. Could they put information in there saying, okay, the next president-elect in the year 2048 was assassinated 3 weeks after he was sworn in? Put that kind of information in there, send it back, so then we will have it on the books. We'll be able to prevent it. Or are they going to put blueprints on these itty-bitty particles that they're sending back in time, telling people from the past how to build these elaborate weapons of the future to obliterate the enemies before either one of the sides in the future have it? So that's where it gets kind of scary, because when people who deal with that kind of security matters would want to do with it, and I know that's where they would go with it, even if they couldn't physically send a person or object back, if you could send a particle, they would find a way to send the past people information on how to do this. Now, how do you brief somebody? Saying, okay, it's the year January 28th, 2009. The time machine's been on for only 29 days. You debrief somebody on the 29th saying, hey, it is your job to retrieve the particles out of here and give them to Sergeant Major Agent Number 27B or whoever's in charge of the government directive of this. Now, how do you tell this person that from this point on that he's supposed to be expecting a package from the future? What kind of job clearance do you need for that? And what else does he do besides wait around for information from the future? I mean, I'm sure he's part of intelligence. He has other things going on, but how do you tell somebody that there's a possibility in another 40 years, 100 years, that you're going to get messages from that time frame? I don't know. Might be a pretty cool gig, though. Sitting around waiting for something to happen, even though you're thinking it will never happen. But then when it does, who do you report to? How do you keep everybody briefed enough knowing that this is going to happen, but not knowing if you can use the information because you don't know how far ahead in the future it is? And then when you get this information from the future, and even let's say you received it and it's only 3 weeks out from when you receive it, is that enough time to open up or read what's on this little itty bitty little particle that they've figured out a way to put information on or in? Or is that going to take several days to retrieve it? And if so, you've lost time there. Then once you get the information, is it information present day intelligence is going to look at and go, okay, we need to do or we don't? But then if it wasn't something you wanted to do present day into the past, which would, how do you in the present day convince the past it's important enough to change or try to look at, other than the fact that you thought it was important enough to send it into the past? Interesting, isn't it? If you have thoughts on this subject, regardless how far-fetched or how down-to-earth they are, let me know what they are. Email them to me. You can instant message me tonight if you'd like as well on this subject, but I got a feeling a lot of you are going to find this interesting in the future months to come. So remember, email's always open. Email me 24/7, especially on this topic. This topic is very close to me. I've been a big time travel fan since as far back as I can remember. And like I said, if I had the chance, I would take it in a heartbeat to time travel. Even if it was going back 2 weeks, I would go. And if you're just joining us, you're listening to Radio Visions with Darrah. And tonight's topic is time travel, or change. If you could go back into time and change anything, would you? And what would that be if you could change it? The scenarios that we have opened up are current day scenarios that are real. Scientists are actually working on time travel using lasers. And they are theorizing that they can send a particle back into time. So what are your thoughts? Do you believe it? Do you not believe it? What are the pros that you're thinking of? What are the cons that you're thinking of? Let me know. And remember, regardless what your feeling is about this subject, good, bad, indifferent, share that with us as well. Share that with us as well. And remember, you're listening to Radio Visions, Internet Radio with Darrah. We're here every Friday and Saturday nights. And if you've read over the website, you'll see that we've made some changes starting next weekend on December 5th, which is a Friday. We will be coming here 30 minutes later than normal. We will be running from 10:30 p.m. until midnight. We are trying some scheduling changes to make things a little more workable on our end and your end. We're integrating music into Radio Visions, and the music will start playing on January 1st, 2009. So if you're an artist, a musician, a band, or just someone that plays around and are just having fun with music in general, send us your stuff. Go on the website, print off the permission form or the broadcasting form, mail it to us with your music on a CD, and we would love to integrate that into Radio Visions and start playing your music on Radio Visions. We really need the music. I was hoping to have more music than I do at this point because we've only had a handful of people submit music. And I know our website still says that we are looking for new age, cool jazz, and smooth jazz music. And yes, we are. But if you do other styles or genres of music like rock and roll, blues, techno, pop, send that as well. We'd be happy to receive it all and listen to it, and we'll see what makes it on to broadcast. Because a lot of it will be broadcast. Because, like I said, at this point, we have very little to work with. And those of you who have sent in music, I do appreciate it very, very much. Like I said, right now we are starting to put our playlist or our programming together, so we will need more music than just what we have. So keep that in mind. Or if you don't produce your own music and you know other people who produces music, please pass this along to them. Let them know that we can do this so they can get heard as well. So keep that in mind. And remember, you're listening to Radio Visions every Friday and Saturday night. Now going back to our topic of time travel. Please email us with your thoughts and theories, your pros and cons. Do you believe in it? Do you think it's only fantasy? Let us know. If you're interested in knowing more about the gentleman that's trying to do the time travel right now using the lasers, there's a lot of video on him posted on YouTube. Just type in time travel and he'll pop up. And it's really a cool and interesting theory he has, and I hope he succeeds. I really do. And if he needs a live guinea pig, have him call me. I would be more than happy to jump through his little time machine and go back to whenever they turn it on. So keep that in mind. So what would you change if you could change it? Growing up, were you bullied as a child? Would you go back in time and change that? Or would you just go back in time and talk to yourself? Tell yourself, in 2 weeks, you're going to make a really stupid decision, don't do it. Would you do that? Would you take your chance to go back and do that one thing? Because theoretically, right now, real-time travel is being developed, and it's pretty much being developed as a one-way trip. So keep that in mind, that what we know now is a one-way trip in time travel. Not saying eventually it won't be both ways. So I have always wondered, if you could develop a machine that could send you back into time at any point that there was civilization, so in other words, man is already around and been around for a while, could you send enough information back with a person saying all you would need to do is find these are all elements, and you'd be able to make a makeshift time portal to jump back to the present day? If that would be the case, that would be really cool, really interesting. Because theoretically, a lot of people think that time travel will end up being done with electromagnetic fields. Because honestly, even in my personal opinion, if you get a strong enough electromagnetic field, you can distort time and space. Now, if you get it strong enough, can you punch a hole in it to make you go from point A to point B? The jury is still out on that. And like I said, the current theory of time travel is using lasers. And I hope they're really right about that as well. But if you could use an electromagnetic field or electromagnet, you could go back in time to almost any period and would be able to make a electromagnet. All you need is current, electricity, and metal to make a field. So with that knowledge, ideally you could make another jump gate. Interesting thought. Or going back to pure fiction, or science fiction, that is. If you needed to make an electromagnetic field strong enough to punch a hole in time to jump through it, use a lightning rod for your electricity. If you could get a storm big enough to hit that sucker and you had it hooked up to like an electromagnet, just think of the magnetic field that would produce. It would either punch a hole in time and send the entire planet somewhere, or it would definitely cause a shift in time somewhere, one would think. Just a thought. Just a thought. Interesting thought at that, but just a thought as well. So give me your thoughts on time travel. Real, not real, make-believe. If it's real, would you consider doing it? Let's say, for the sake of argument, they've developed a time machine that allows two-way time travel. So that means wherever you start from, you can get back to. Would you jump forward in time, backwards in time? Would you want to? There's a high percentage of the population right now saying they would go into space if they could. I think that same percentage, if not more, would do time travel. I'm not saying time travel would be any safer than space travel, but I got a feeling that more people would be willing to do time travel than they would space travel. That's just a gut feeling I have, and I think it has to do with the fact that time travel, most people associate it with they'd step into a machine, it would zap them somewhere, and they'd step out at a point pretty much where they left. So they're still on the planet. They're still knowing when they step out there's air and oxygen, and they're not going to suffocate or freeze to death into oblivion or whatever space would do to you, And I can justify that myself. There's a little fear there. But given the opportunity, I would go into space in a heartbeat as well. I don't know if that makes me different than anybody else out there, or maybe a little crazy. I don't know. But I would do it. How about you? Would you? Let me know. Send me emails on this one. Would you time travel if you could? Even if you knew it wasn't safe, would you time travel? And if you could, where would you want to go? Forward or backwards? There's sometimes I think I would like to go forward just to see what's coming. And there's times that I'm thinking I'd rather visit the past to see where I've been, see what's going on. Because I think everybody out there has things they regret, they wish they could do differently. I am no exception. I wouldn't mind going back in time and changing a few things. So that's the big thing I think people theorize over, fret over, if you will. If they go back, would they have the nerve to actually change it? Because face it, that would change who you are instantaneously. Let me give you an example of that one. You grew up in a household, let's say, where you were the only child. And your folks didn't really seem to have time for you, so growing up was kind of hard. Really sucked. But you became a stronger person for this. You grew up, graduated high school, top of the class. Why? Because you had to fight for every single thing you had. Nothing was ever handed to you. You had to fight for it. So you graduated top of your class, high school, went on to college, graduated with really high marks or honors there as well. Went on and became a quantum mechanics theorist, and here you are now time traveling. So you go back in time. Knowing that it's not safe, you do it anyway. You go back to 6 weeks before you were born. If we could pinpoint it that close with time travel. And you meet your folks, befriend them, because they're roughly about your age now, let's say, you know. Now remember, this is all hypothetical. And you befriend them and talk to them and kind of help guide them, unknowing to them, you kind of help guide them on how to be better parents. So the child arrives and they're actually decent people, take care of the child, raise them as they should have the first time around. So okay, now all of a sudden that changes all the things you had to do in order to make it. Because now things might have been a little easier for you. You didn't have to fight for them quite as hard. So here comes that big theory of the paradox. If that was the case and they became better parents, you didn't have to fight as hard. Did you still end up graduating the top of your class? Did you still end up getting into time travel? Did you still end up going back in time? These are the things that some people say can't change. I would like to think they could, to some degree. Because physically you are there, you know that you still graduated with high marks, you still helped develop time travel, you still took the chance of going back in time. But this time around, life was a little bit easier for you. I think you still would make all the same choices you did the first time around, except for this time, instead of having to do it all on your own, you had help. So maybe you have a little extra knowledge now that you didn't know you would have by doing this. That's the way I would like to look at it. And I would hope I am right on that. Because thinking the fact that once something has happened, you can never change it is kind of depressing. Yeah, it's kind of depressing. A few years back, they had remade a movie called The Time Machine from H.G. Wells. And I like the clause or the theory they threw in this movie Now, granted, it was nothing like the original movie that came out in the 50s. I still like that one better. Just noting it, saying it. But the new one had some cool special effects. And they threw in a few things that the first one didn't have. For example, the young H.G. Wells was traveling and wanted to know why he couldn't. He designed his time machine because his fiancée got killed, so he wanted to go save her. And no matter what he did, he couldn't save her. And the moral of it was, in order for him to build his machine, she had to die. So that was one fixed point in time and space that cannot ever change, because if she never died, he never built the machine. So we know paradoxes do exist, but do they really affect the things that we think they affect? So if you're out there listening to this and you are a scholar, a philosopher, or someone who has dabbled enough in time travel to think they can coherently give us some real insight on what you think paradoxes are and aren't, please email me, let me know. I would really like to know. I've got a lot of theories myself, saying there is no such thing as paradoxes. On the other hand, everyday life is a paradox. So, how much of life can we change if we can time travel? How much of it is a fixed point in time that we can never change? For instance, currently the gentleman that is building this time machine using lasers as his motive, or mode of doing it, is doing so because when he was younger his father had died. And I believe it was due to heart failure or something along those lines. And so he studied his little butt off, and now here he is developing theories on time travel and hopefully building a time machine. Could be this year, could be 20 years from now, but he's doing it. Now if he does it and we can get past sending just the particle back in time to sending him back in time or someone else, could they go back and tell his dad, you know, if you take care of yourself a little better, you'll be around a lot longer? And if the gentleman listens to the ideas of this and keeps good care of himself and doesn't die when he did, does that mean time travel wasn't invented? Or does that mean that no matter what happens, he's going to die because that's what led this gentleman to build his time machine, just like in the movie? Lots of interesting theories, lots of interesting ideas out there. Please let me know what you think about this. And if you're just joining us, you're listening to RadioVisions with Darrah. And tonight's topic is change and time travel. What would you change if you could time travel? I've always pondered this, and I've pondered it a lot. There's a lot of things I would change right off the bat without hesitation. And when I say change, I mean personal change. I would not go back for wealth. I would not go back for any of the common day stuff that most people think they would do it for. Money to me is a means of doing stuff, but it is not the end all be it all for me. I know a lot of people out there that money is that to them, so I'm sure that these people are thinking if they could go back in time, they'd try to figure out a way to make more money. And if that's what they wanted, great for them. More power to you. But I think I would change some aspects of my life that didn't go real well, that just weren't real good times. I would go back and try to change those first. Now, if I could go back, then come back to where I started from, there would be a lot more I would change. But if it was a one-way trip, like we've talked about earlier, I would go back to probably 1986, the year I was graduating high school, and I would coach my young self through a few things that ended up being not so wonderful, in my personal opinion. I know some other people that went through some of these exact same things with me at the same time with me and thought these were the greatest things on the planet that we were doing. So, it's all in perspective on what was great for you and what was not. So keep that in mind. And I would start there and start changing things at that point. And like I said, if it was a one-way trip, I would have to make the best of it. But you gotta look at it this way as well, I guess. If you left your current day, like I said, and I said I'd go back to 1986 and start coaching my younger self on certain stuff, that would mean 20 some years later, there would be a version of me that's the age I am today, and there would be a version of me that's 20 years older than me. Think about it. There'd be two of you. Now, how would you cope with that if there was two of you? Would you fix what was wrong and then go live your life somewhere else so your younger self could go ahead and finish out their life? Or would you be the rebound person for this younger self for the next 20 years? And then this is the scary point, if you really think about it. If you jump back 21 years in time, or 22 years in time, or however long it is, to coach your younger self not to make mistakes. So you jump back to 1986. There are two of you physically there. So from 1986 to the year 2000 to January 2009, let's say that's when you jump back in time. So between 1986 and January 2009, during those 20-some years, there's going to be physically two of you until you reach that point where the younger you jumps back in time, leaving the older you to go ahead and go forward in time then. So think about that. How would that work out for you? Like I said, would you go back in time and fix the things that you thought were wrong? And let your younger self know that at some point in time he would have to jump back in time to keep the loop going? And then you as an older person could go out and live and lead a whole new life. New friends, new families, new scenarios. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? That would really be interesting. It'd be kind of bizarre. But at the same time, for your friends or family members who didn't know you were going to jump back in time, think about it. One day you would go to work, jump back in time, and that exact same day, if you remembered what day it was, you could resurface in your old life, and to everybody around you, in one day you would have aged 20 years. Wouldn't that be wild? It'd freak a lot of people out, that's for sure. Or would you just let your family members know that you were jumping back in time if you could? I don't know if this would be classified, depending on what group of security was working on it and so on and so forth. But think about it. If you could tell your family that you were jumping back in time, and if you were currently married, would your spouse be okay with it, knowing that January 1st at 2 p.m. you were going to instantaneously be 20 years older than them? It would be interesting. It would be interesting to see how people coped with it. I would like to think that if you were married, your spouse would be able to handle it. But on the same time, would they? Because if you were 40 years old when you jump back 20 years, and in one day you went from being 40 to 60, would that freak them out? Would they even want to still be with you? For that matter, would you want to be with them? Because you had spent the last 20 years without them. Something to think about. And if you just joined us, you are listening to RadioVisions, and I am Darrah. Tonight's topic is change and time travel. If you could go back in time and change anything, would you? And if you also still have holiday parties you're planning and haven't booked all of your entertainment for them, remember that I do have shows that will fit any need in any type of event. So please look over the website, pick out a show, give me a call, and see if I still have that date open, because I do have a few dates left open. And I would be happy to work with you with any date you would like. One of the most versatile shows I have is called The Psychic Party, where I come out and set up and give your guest readings all night long. So keep that in mind. That's one of the biggest and the best for the holidays. If you're having a formal party, I would go with a show that I've called The Stranger. It is a really cool party, especially if you're doing what I would call masquerade parties, because then nobody would really know who I was. Nobody would know who I was anyway, but keep that in mind. If you still got parties and stuff going on that you haven't booked entertainment for, give me a call. Let me know what nights you have for your parties, and I would be glad to let you know if I still have that time slot open. So if you're just joining us, you're listening to RadioVisions, and I am Darrah. And tonight's topic is time travel and change. If you could go back in time, what would you change? Or would you change anything at all? Or would you go back in time just to become wealthy? I know a lot of you out there have been saying, oh, I'd go back in time and become rich and rich and rich. And if you've thought about that scenario for a while, like I said earlier, I have thought more on time travel in my life than I have probably thought on any other subject. So I have done almost every scenario thinkable as far as what would you do. So if you could go back in time, and if you were doing it to make money, how would you do it? Would you go back and play the stock market? Would you go back and bet on football games, horse races, dog races? How would you make your money? I have theorized if you go back and do it discreetly, you would benefit so much more than if you would go into a casino and start betting on every hand of poker that you remembered that you lost. Think about it. So I would go in and start betting on, I'd do a few bets on horses. To me, that would just be sheer entertainment. But if I was going back to make some serious money and do it undetected, I would go back in time with at least $1,000 in cash on me, making sure it was the currency of the day, of course. And even if you only jump back, let's say 40 years, open up a bank account, throw your money into the savings account. That's all you'd have to do. And let it sit there for 40 years accumulating money. And I know what you're thinking. Well, that's not a very fast way to make money. It's not a very fast way, but it's a legitimate way. You can't get arrested for it. You'd go back in time, open a savings account, and even if the interest rate 40 years ago was only 0.5%, what's 0.5% over 40 years? Or if you went back in time and said, okay, I'm going to take the money, and I know that the next 6 Super Bowls were won by so-and-so. Bet on those. Why? Because it's only once a year. And you can make a lot of money to shove into the savings account that you're going to let there and sit there for the next 40 years. So then when your future self checks this savings account, there's a lot of money there. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can make money by time travel. One of the quickest ways would be going and doing your homework and research on every horse race or dog race or car race or football game in the last 40 years. Jot it all down in a ledger book and take it with you when you jump back in time. I think they did. I know they did this scenario on one of the Back to the Future movies, where a book from the future ended up in the past, and one of the characters made a lot of money betting on this betting book of all major events in the last 40 years or whatever it was. You could do that for yourself. Sit down, do the homework. It'd be easy this day and age. Everything's online. You could find it in a heartbeat. Go back in time and do it. Now, if you wanted to make some real money, and this is one that I have thought about for a while, that would really blow the technology people out of the water. If you could time travel, even if it was one way back into the past, what would happen if you went out and bought a laptop computer and jumped back 40 years in time with this laptop computer? Took it down to the patent office and patented it inside and out. I mean, patented every little nook and cranny of it. And then took this laptop to some major firm that was just then starting to dabble into what they thought computers were. And say, hey, I've got this idea. I've got a working model of it, and I will sell it to you, as long as I get X percentage of everything you come up with. Now, by just doing that one simple feat of taking this laptop computer that cost you maybe $600 in the present day, 40 years in the past, just think what you just changed. Even if you could time travel two ways, backwards and forwards, and you did that with the laptop computer, took it back to, like I said, 40 years in the past, gave it to a company after you patented it inside and out, of course, so you can make some money off this. Like I said, that was the purpose of this part of the discussion, was making money on time travel. And left it with them. Then jump back to the point you left. What do you think would have changed? Anything? I think you would jump back to a place that would be so far ahead of itself that it'd be scary. For instance, the technology in a laptop nowadays, everybody takes for granted. Because face it, laptops have been around for at least 10, 15 years now. Actually, they've been around a little longer than that, but good working laptops have been around 10, 15 years. Now all of a sudden that technology has been around, let's say 40 years, because that's how far back you jump. So you jump to the future. Now computers don't even look like laptops anymore. Nowadays you come in and the computer is a free-floating hologram in your office or your home. Or it's the size of a playing card you hold up and talk to and it talks back. Or there's no more internet as we know it. There's no more servers out there. There's no more nothing. Right now the computer network is life itself. Who knows what it would be? Think about the possibilities that the satellites that are in orbit now would be so different. Because the technology that puts the satellites in orbit right now are actually older than the computers you're probably using right now to listen to this broadcast. Because as quickly as computers change, it takes companies like NASA and all the other major companies that produce satellites, it takes them X amount of years to take a computer system and integrate it into a satellite of some kind. Even into the space shuttle, that the computers they use there are a few years behind what you can buy and place in your home now. Because it takes them a while to decide on a system, start putting it through the test to see if it's going to survive the conditions of space. So keep that in mind as well, that everything would have changed so dramatically. Makes you think though, doesn't it? How cool it would be, or how cool it wouldn't be. I don't know. So what would you do if you could time travel? Let me know. Call me. Well, actually email me on that one. Yeah, emails would be better. But like I said, email me. Let me know what your thoughts are on time travel. Or if you're listening to this live this Friday night, send me an instant message. Let me know what your thoughts of the time travel are. Let me know what... It's just so mind-staggering to think that time travel could be here within the next 15 to 20 years on some scale. And the scary part is that if time travel could be here in the next 15 to 20 years, then that would mean somebody in the year 2140 has been time traveling for some time. Think about it. Here's another theory on time travel. There is no such thing as UFOs. All these little bright lights we've been seeing in the skies, all these so-called alien abductions, all of this is fake. What it really is humans from the future traveling to certain points in the past, figuring stuff out. Because face it, if time travel is upon us this century, or even the next one, 3,000 years in our future from today, time travel would probably be almost every day, an almost everyday occurrence, wouldn't you think? So therefore, let's say in the future, if we as humans keep going on the path we're going to screw up this planet royally anyway. So we've got scientists from the future coming to the past, taking air samples, water samples, ground samples, and are actually taking human samples, therefore alien abductions. Taking DNA samples back to the future, trying to figure out how they can fix things from that point of view. That is another theory that's out there, that there are no aliens visiting our planet. It's just humans traveling from the future to the past, trying to figure stuff out to correct the problems we have in the future. And a lot of you are thinking, well, if that's the case, why don't these people just come forward and say, hey, we're from the future and we need your help? Theoretically, they probably could do that. But like everything else in life, time travel will probably be policed, if not by the government, from some other agency out there put together to do it. So I'm sure they will have some protocols in place saying that if we go into the past, there are certain things that we can and can't do so we don't alter their future to make it worse. Theoretically, if the future is so messed up but they're able to time travel, why don't they just go back to a point in time before that event happened and try to fix it? Like I say, there's a lot of theories out there on what can and can't happen with time travel. I would like to think that when we get to the point of physically doing it, it will be done to benefit and not to destroy. So, because if you could live through a war, then go back after the war was over, and do a handful of things that would prevent the war to start with. I would like to think that's possible, but some theories will not allow that. So, who knows what really will and will not happen once time travel is fully here. And like I said, if you could change something, what would you personally change? Would you go back in time and stop yourself from getting married? Would you stop yourself from having kids? Or would you go back and say, this time around, I want to get married. I want to have kids, because the first time around you decided you didn't want to. And if you could change that fact, what happens? Here's another paradox theory. And if you're just joining us, you're listening to RadioVisions with Darrah. And tonight's topic is change, time travel. If you could go back in time and change anything, would you or would you not? Email me, let me know what you think about this one. Or instant message me, IM me, and let me know what you would think if you're out there listening to it live tonight. So my new paradox for the moment is, let's say that you're in your 50s, you never got married, you never had kids, but now that you're in your 50s, you're kind of wishing you did. So someone comes up to you and goes, hey, I can send you back into time and so you could meet yourself when you were 21. And you take this person up on it and they actually send you back in time and you meet yourself when you're 21. Do you convince yourself that you need to settle down, start a family, and live a life that you never lived? And if your younger self agreed to doing that, would it be for the best? And if you could do that, what would be stopping your younger self from settling down, getting a family, growing old, and when they got to that point where you left in time, would they want to leave in time, but this time they were thinking, I'm going to go back and stop myself from getting married and having a family because it wasn't what I thought? Does it become a big loop, a big circle, a big paradox of you changing things over and over and over again? For one lifetime you're married and have kids. The next lifetime you're not married, don't have kids. The time after that, maybe you're not married, but you have a spouse and children with that spouse, but you're not married. You know, there's different variations of what's happening there, but is that what happens? You keep reliving this circle over and over and over again? Interesting thought. And what happens to the older self that had jumped back in time? What happens to him or her? Do they just go on living? Do they reach that point in time and just disappear? That's another theory that's out there. If you jump backwards in time, let's say it's 2 weeks. You jump 2 weeks backwards in time, and there are 2 physical yous in the universe now. Some people say that the universe would not allow that, and one of you would have to be done away with. So one of you would have to die. Okay, fine. But on the off chance that the universe would allow it to happen, you go back in time and there's 2 of you for the next 2 weeks until you reach that time point where one of you jumps back in time. So, is it the older one that keeps jumping back in time, or is it the younger one that keeps jumping back in time? I know there's only 2 weeks age difference, but think about it. Or, if you jump back in time 2 weeks, and when you get to that point where you jump back, if your younger self decides not to jump back, Does the older self just cease to exist because you never jumped? How does that work? Or does it? Another paradox in time travel. Interesting, isn't it? If you're just joining us and you're wondering what we're talking about time travel, we're talking about paradoxes, we're talking about, would you go back in time and make changes? Would you go back and stop yourself from being married? Or would you go back in time and try to talk your younger self into getting married? Or into having a family, or not having a family? Or trying to figure out a way to make yourself filthy rich? What would you do if you could time travel back into time? And if there were stipulations on the way time travel worked, for instance, if you could jump back into time, but it was only a one-way trip, would you do it? Would you take the chance of jumping back 6 weeks, 20 years, 200 years, knowing that once you got there, you would have to live the rest of your remaining days there? Would you do it? Instant message me and let me know what you think you would do. Send me an email. Tell me what you would do on this one. Would you really take that chance? What do you think about time travel? Is it real? Is it even getting close? Is it all make-believe? If it's real, what are the paradoxes that are going to happen or that are happening right now as we speak? Because if it's real, that means even if it was invented today, this moment, 300 years from now, they're using time travel. Think about it. Those people could be coming back to this day right now. Are they changing it? They could be going back further in time, correcting one problem but causing another, and you and I would never know any of it because we would be living through that timeline that got changed. So for all we know, at one point in time, President Lincoln was assassinated. That's the timeline we know. But then again, maybe in the original timeline, he wasn't assassinated, but somebody from the future thought they wanted to change something and went back and did it. So here we are in a timeline where he was assassinated. So many things that could happen and not happen, and it would become our everyday life. Why? Because we were not aware that there was somebody time traveling, changing these events. For all we know, that Kennedy survived the first assassination attempt on his life. But then again, in our timeline, we know he didn't. So maybe someone from the future went back and set it all up so it would happen that way. Kind of interesting, kind of strange, kind of, what would you do if you could do it? Would you pay money to go back in time if time travel was available? There's been a few movies out here recently, when I say recently, within the last 10 to 15 years where time travel is being used as tourism. Kind of like now when you book a flight on an airplane to fly to California, get on a boat and take a cruise. In these TV shows and movies, people are booking basically cruises to go either backwards in time or forwards in time to watch certain events happen. Some of these destination spots are like watching the Titanic sink, or watching the Hindenburg blow up, or going back in time and watching Mount St. Helens erupt. People are booking trips in time to see these major events in our history. If that was possible, would you book a trip to do that? If you could go have ringside seats when Mount St. Helens erupted, would you go do it and watch it? Knowing that nobody else around really thought it was going to erupt that day, but you and your little tourist group showed up, hiked up the mountain, went to a spot you knew was not affected by the eruption, and watched it happen. Would you? How much would something like that cost? You think it would cost a lot? So if you wanted to go back in time and do it, it would cost you $400,000. Or maybe it's commonplace and it only costs you $600 or $700. Kind of like an airline ticket. Would be interesting, wouldn't it? So many things you could do over and over and over again. So much money to be made in time travel. Not in just the act of time travel itself. That will make a lot of money all by itself. But the fact of the matter is, if you could go back in time, you could play the stock market. Know what stocks did really well for a long period of time or a short period of time. Know when to pull them out the day before. Go back just 2 or 3 years ago when the housing industry was booming so hard that it was unreal. Buy up 80 houses on the market. Turn around and sell them before the housing bubble burst. Think about it. Huge money to be made in time travel. On every end and angle, huge money to be made on time travel. I don't care how you look at it. For the people who invent the means of time travel, they will become wealthy overnight. And for the people who will exploit the means, they will become wealthy overnight. I always thought that if I could time travel, I would do it to benefit the world, not just myself. And yes, I would do some things to benefit myself, providing it put no one else in harm's way. But that brings up a whole another can of worms. That goes back to, like I said earlier, that you were married, you go back in time and stop yourself from getting married because your marriage wasn't that great for whatever reason. But if you had kids with this person, and you went back in time and stopped yourself, does that mean that you just wiped out your children that you have loved and cared for the last however many years? You know, there's small details like that in time travel that people say they'd go and do, but could you really do it? Could you really jump back in time and say, I'm not marrying so-and-so because the relationship ended up being either abusive or just wrong to start with, or whatever the scenario was in it, and you went back and prevented it to start with? Could you do that knowing that the children that you have had with this person would just disappear, cease to exist, never happened? Could you do it? I know some people think, yeah, they could do it, but when it came right down to doing it, I don't know if they'd follow through. I just don't know if they would. Hard decision, isn't it? Hard decision. So give me your thoughts on this. Send me emails. Send me IMs. Let me know you're out there. You are listening to RadioVisions, and I am Darrah. This is Friday night, November 29th, 2008. Tonight's topic is time travel and changing. And if you could go back in time and change anything you would like, what would it be? Would you go back and change the fact that you have been a smoker for the last 45 years and you would like to quit because you're starting to physically get ill because you're getting cancer or emphysema, and you would go back and kick your younger self in the butt until they quit so you'd both feel better in the future? Or would you go back in time and play the ponies for the next 4 weeks and rake in a buttload of money? Or play the stock market? What would you do? How would you do it? Would you do stuff to benefit the world or just yourself? And if this means of time travel, if it was a one-way trip, would you do it? Would you go back in time knowing that once you got there that you were stuck there? Regardless of what was going on, you were stuck there. Interesting thought, isn't it? Knowing that you would be stuck there forever and ever and ever. But just think of all the changes you can make in the future years coming. For instance, you would know time travel would eventually happen. Would you take the steps of trying to patent the ideas that you thought went into this? Because even if you knew nothing about time travel, you were just the lab rat, the guinea pig that jumped in the machine and went back, not knowing a lot of the how-tos of it. But you knew enough of what was involved. Because currently the idea that they're going to do time travel is using lasers. So you knowing that, would you go back in time and try to patent every laser device that came out? Or would you try to figure out how to contribute your worth to developing lasers, knowing that it would eventually lead to time travel? Or if you knew all the ins and outs about time travel, would you go back in time and start working on this theory earlier? Because face it, lasers have been around for quite a long time. So if you knew for a fact that they were using lasers in the year 2008 to build time travel, and you could get your hands on lasers, let's say in the year 1950 or 1960, they might be really crude back then, but would you start trying to figure out the time machine then? That would be a cool idea. Very, very cool. So give me your thoughts on this. Send me instant messages. Send me emails. Let me know what you think about time travel and change. Would you do it? Or would you rather go to the future instead of the past? But if time travel was a one-way trip and you could go to the future, would you? You'd be missing a lot. And that would bring up some paradoxes that we haven't talked about yet as well. If time travel was still a one-way trip, but you could go forwards or backwards, and you chose to go forwards, and let's say you went forwards 100 years in time. So one day you go to work, jump in this machine, you would physically disappear off the face of the planet and reappear 100 years later. So the people you left behind would just think you were gone, never coming home again. And then the people in the future would be just as mystified about you as you are them. Because everything would be new and wondrous to you, but they would want to learn firsthand what their past was like. Would you be up to that task? Would you know enough about what's going on today to tell somebody 100 years in the future what they would need to know? Not saying you'd want to talk to him anyway, because you're too busy worrying about yourself, I guess, if you jump into the future to see what's going on. But it's all there. It's all intriguing to think about. Say you jump 100 years to the future, you get there, what are you expecting to see? Beautiful cities with no smog, everybody gets along? Or are you expecting to see basically what's here now? Wars going on, people hurting each other. Things really don't change. You know, I mean, what are you expecting if you jump into the future, knowing you can't go back to where you left? What would be the point? Besides just getting away from life, starting over. That would be interesting. And how would our governments really use time travel? We'd theorize that they would try to turn it into some kind of weapon or use it to their advantage in wartime. That would be okay, depending on what side of the fence of the war you were on, I guess. Now, if they could use time travel, the governments, the military people, if they could use it to prevent the war without losing a single life on either side, I would be all for it. I would say, go for it, do it, let's have a good time with it. But if their thought was to jump back in time and kill everybody before they had a chance to jump on us or whatever happened, I don't know if I would be happy with that scenario. I think the scenario that would be more satisfactory is that they jump back in time, knowing that whoever was going to attack on a certain day, and we get a hold of their leaders and say, hey, we know what you're planning, we know what's coming, we need to sit down and talk and negotiate about it. I see that working better. And then if they don't come to an agreement, then use force. But just to pop in out of nowhere and start shooting would just be wrong on anybody's part. So that's just all theory and conjecture there. But like I said, the current method of time travel is being developed as we speak. And you can watch videos on that on YouTube. If you go on YouTube and type in time travel. And there's so much stuff on YouTube right now about time travel. Some of it is so far-fetched and make-believe. It's fun to watch. And there's so much other documentary stuff on there that is really, really fascinating. But the current theory of time travel right now is that it will basically be a one-way trip into the past, but only into the past as far back as we have the time machine. So for instance, this device that they're working on using lasers, they're going to try to send a particle back in time. It's just a particle. And they're also claiming they can maybe send information with that particle back in time by either writing on it or filling it full of information. I don't know how that part works, but that's what they're theorizing. And great, wonderful if they can. I'd be curious to learn more about that myself. But if they turn this machine on January 1st, 2009, that is the furthest back in time they can send anything. So, theoretically, the day they turn that machine on, they should start getting particles from the future. And I know what you're thinking. What? How does that work? Because the moment they turn it on, it opens the opposite end of the doorway. Because in the future, this machine has been turned on already for 2 weeks, 2 years, 400 years, forever. So if it's a year down the road and they send a particle back, they can pull it out January 1st, 2009, even though the year might be 2019, you know. So keep that in mind, that it would only go back till that date. And if, now this is what I was wondering earlier, if this machine gets turned on and is left on, like they say they're going to have it in order to retrieve these particles from the future, because it will be them sending the particles back to start with. So I'll let you wrap your heads around that any way you want. So they're sending these particles back to themselves, basically, and if the machine is turned on January 1st, 2009, and all these particles are streaming from the future back to this one point, do the people at that one point know what to do with the particles yet? You know, do they know how to get the information off of them, and so on and so forth? And if you don't retrieve them, what happens to the particle? Do the lasers get hot enough to burn them up? Do the particles just keep continuously going further and further and further back into time, into oblivion? What would happen to them if they're not retrieved? Where do they go? Does anybody have any speculation on that yet? And why am I getting to that? Because if this is going to be what time travel is as of now, and we can send living matter back in time, be it a lab rat or a human, What happens to that person if the person on the opposite end of the machine doesn't retrieve him? What happens to him? Do they just go into oblivion, never to be heard from again? Or do they get to the what we would call the beginning of time and pop out there and become one of the first life forms on this planet? What happens? How's that work? If you have some insights on that or some theories on that, email me them. Let me know what you think. I'd be curious to know. I might do a little more research on that myself. But it's just one of those things that there's so many variables that can happen with time travel. And I know a lot of you out there are still thinking that time travel is purely science fiction. But you got to remember, 30 years ago, the computer you're using today was science fiction. Keep that in mind as well, okay? Also keep in mind that all the other little devices that we use today, even 20 to 30 years ago, like cell phones, they were just science fiction as well. So keep that in mind, that what is science fiction today is reality tomorrow. And the ironic thing about science fiction and science is that they actually go hand in hand. Because science fiction writers will tell you that they pull their inspiration a lot of times off what is currently being developed. And a lot of scientists will tell you that their inspiration on what they're currently trying to develop came from science fiction writers. So if that's the case, that the writers are using current science, and current science is using writers, where's it really coming from? Is it coming from the future? Is it coming from deep space? I don't know. Where is this coming from? Because everybody fantasized about space travel for ever. And we're now doing space travel. It's not deep space travel, but it's space travel. We're at least attempting it, trying it, doing it. That is the important part. We are doing it. So I give kudos to these gentlemen that are trying to break the time barriers using lasers. Kudos to you, because you are trying it. You are giving it your all. You're trying to understand things that are physically there, that science is just now being able to show us that it's there. So keep that in mind as well. All you people that are in love with Star Trek or Stargate or a handful of these other shows that are out there currently, these shows are what is leading the way to realities of some of these dimensions. Interdimensional travel will happen someday as well. That will probably happen as sure as enough as time travel will. A lot of people theorize that time travel isn't really traveling through time, but it's traveling through dimensions. So in fact, when we go back in time and change something, the timeline you left continues forward as it always was, but what you changed will make a new timeline, then people get split off into an alternate reality, basically. That is an interesting theory, and I need more research on that myself, but it would be interesting to know if that was really happening. That every time you make a decision, reality's split somewhere, and there's 2 or 3 different timelines going off in different directions. Because in this reality, you got married. And in 3,000 other realities, you didn't. You did, but they were all with different variables that half of them never got married, the other half got married, but to different people or different this or different that. All the little things were different. You got married, had 12 kids, but in a different alternate reality, you got married and only had one. That's just as bad as time travel, trying to wrap your head around that. Some people say alternate realities are real. They're there. And every once in a while, people get a glimpse of them. That's where this deja vu feeling comes from, they say. Now, if that's true or not, I don't know. Some days I wish it was really bad. Other days, it's just kind of a fun and fascinating thing to talk about. So I would like your input, what do you think is possible? Will these people be able to break down the time barriers? And someday we will be time traveling just as easily as we crawl on an airplane and go from one coast to the other? Or is it something that will never happen? Or is it something that you think is happening right now today, but our government is in control of it, or some little agency is in control of it, not letting the general public know that it's really happening? Lots out there. I personally think when time travel is discovered, it will be a group that is not related to the government, but this group will be watched by the government because of their strides getting as close as they are to it. And like I said, whenever the government thinks that there might be a military application on something, regardless how far-fetched it is, they'll keep an eye on it to some degree. Now, what that degree is, I can't tell you, but they'll keep an eye on it. So keep that in mind too. So if you just joined us, this is RadioVisions and I am Darrah, and tonight's topic is time travel and change. If you could go back in time, would you change anything? And if so, what would you change? Would you change your own life? Would you stop yourself from getting married? Or would you go back and make yourself get married? Would you go back in time and convince your younger self not to get drunk and get behind that car that hurt some people? Or whatever the scenario was, would you go back and change it? And could you deal with the consequences of going back and changing it? For instance, if you knew time travel was a one-way trip, would you be willing to do it still? Or if you went back in time and changed the wrong thing that altered your future, could you live with that mistake as well? So keep that in mind, that time travel is not a done deal. It's not cut and dry. It's got a lot of different variables in there. It's kind of like the butterfly effect. If you jump back in time 80,000 years and killed a butterfly and jump back to where you left, the whole world could be a different place from that one single act, because for all you knew, that butterfly was supposed to go pollinate certain flowers that was supposed to kill off a certain species, but since it never did, that species lived, and then when man showed up, it ate man, so man never survived. A lot of different things that could happen if we start meddling in time. But then again, if time travel is possible, the future humans have probably been time traveling for who knows how long, and who knows what they've changed. We will never know what they've changed, because we would just change right along with that timeline. Good or bad, we would change right along with it, not knowing a thing. I think that aspect of it kind of scares me a little bit. When I say it scares me, that scares me because if it's the government that's involved with time travel, what would they be wanting to change? For all we know, this world at one time was paradise all the way through. Someone developed time travel, went back in time, and decided he wanted to be wealthy. Then that started off commerce wars or whatever you want to call it, now that the world that he left is fighting over silly things, time travel, pros and cons, changes. Would you do it? Would you not? What would you give up to do it? What would you not give up to do it? So many things, so many things. So if you're out there listening, send me an instant message. Let me know what you think of tonight's topic. Is it interesting? Is it boring? Is it real? Is it not real? Is it pure fantasy? Send me an IM. Let me know. Or if you're listening to this as a rebroadcast, let me know what you think then. Send me an email. And you're listening to RadioVisions with Darrah. If you haven't had the time to look over the whole website, please do so. A lot of interesting stuff on the website. A lot of new stuff on the RadioVisions page. If you haven't noticed it when you were logging on, that you'll notice next Friday, December 5th, we will be starting different time slots for the live shows. The live shows will be starting at 10:30 p.m. and going until midnight. So they'll only be running an hour and a half instead of 2 hours starting next weekend. We are doing that to get a head start on putting music together for RadioVisions, because as of January 1st, RadioVisions will be broadcasting music. And a lot of you have been waiting for this for a while, so have we. But we still need more music to broadcast. A lot of you have sent in music, but we still need more. So go to the RadioVisions website, download or print off the RadioVisions permission form, print that off, fill it out, mail it back to me with a CD of your music that you would like us to broadcast. Now, I know our website still says we are looking for new age and cool jazz and smooth jazz to broadcast. But at this point in time, we would be accepting any style of music you would like to send. So if you make rhythms and blues, or if you make rock, or if you make pop or country, please send it. Send it to us all. We would be more than happy to listen to it. We've got some new personalities coming that will be hosting the music side of the RadioVisions. And that will give me time to do programming and to stay on the live side of this. So keep in mind that our new radio personalities are yet to be hired and determined, so they will be coming soon. Keep that in mind. And we've got some other things coming up for RadioVisions that will be very unique and very different from any other radio station out there. We're going to, like I said, incorporate doing the live shows on Fridays and Saturdays. And if you would like live readings done while we're here live, instant message me at any point during the show and I'd be happy to give you a live reading, regardless what the topic is. And going with that, that's really why we are here doing the live shows, is so we can give live readings out to people. And keep that in mind, that if you would like one, all you've got to do is send me that IM and I'd be happy to give you the reading. And like I said, we've got a lot of interesting things coming up for RadioVisions in the future. And right now we are focusing really hard and heavy on getting music put together to broadcast. But like I said, we need more music. So if you produce your own music, you would like it broadcast on a radio station that is hitting a different group of people than the radio stations you listen to maybe during the day, please print off that permission form, that broadcasting form, mail us a CD of your music, and we'd be happy to use it. And when we start putting music on, we will have different personalities hosting that and doing the music. And that format has not been really written yet, and we are working on that as time goes on. Just keep in mind, this is a work in progress. And that would, like I said, and doing the schedule changing for starting next weekend on the live shows, cutting 30 minutes off of it, starting at 10:30 instead of 10, and going until midnight as usual, will give me time to get music programming going and all the changes we need to change for that. So once again, if you're just joining us, this is RadioVisions and I am Darrah, and tonight's topic is changes and time travel. If you could change anything by going back in time, would you? And what would those changes be? Would they be earth-shaking changes that would alter everybody's life on the planet? Or would they be changes that would just alter your life on the planet? So in other words, would you go back in time and save Kennedy from being assassinated? Or would you just rather go back in time and play the stock market and make a lot of money for yourself so your future selves would be well set? And if time travel was a one-way trip, would you still be willing to do it? I think that's a question that most people don't know how to answer at this point in time. They would be, a lot of them would be saying, oh yeah, in a heartbeat I would go, but when it came right down to it, could you step into that machine knowing that you would be gone until you reach that point in time again? And that would be a hard one if you were married. On both ends of that one. Let's say you stepped in your time machine today, went back 20 years in time. For whatever the reason was, you went back 20 years in time. So if you were married, you would be away from your spouse for 20 years. Granted, you'd be able to see the younger version of that spouse, but they would not be your spouse necessarily at that time. They might be, but they might not be, depending on when you got married. And going off that, you'd be by yourself for 20 years. So when in those 20 years, do you get remarried? Do you date? Do you have relationships with people? Do you stay faithful? Now this is where the tricky part comes in. As you live out the 20 years you jump back into, when you get to the point where your younger self jumps back in time 20 years, that leaves you in the present day but 20 years older. So you go home to your spouse as instead of a 40-year-old, you go home to your spouse as a 60-year-old. How does that work? Do they still accept you at that point in time? Or do you start having marital problems because all of a sudden you're not quite as young as you used to be? Kind of interesting to think about. Don't know if you can wrap your head all the way around it. I've thought about a lot of this different time travel scenarios over the years, and the more I think about them, some of them seem really mundane and everyday, and it's a no-brainer, and others I think about and still think, wow, that would just be so awkward, so different. How would one cope with it? Or, since time travel is what we're speaking of, a one-way trip, if you jump back 200 years ago, you would live out your remaining years in the past, and if you were married, your spouse would all of a sudden just be a widow the day you jump back in time. Because the moment you jump back in time, you'd instantly be dead to everybody you left. Especially if you went back 200 years. Even though you lived to the ripe old age of, let's say, 103, you would still be instantly dead to everybody you left today. So, lots of different things to think about. Some of them pretty interesting, some of them kind of scary to think about. Who would be in charge of time travel when it actually becomes a reality? The individuals that invented it, are just the people who invented it. So is the company they were working for, do they own it? And who owns that company? Is it the government? Is it some other little group that we should know about before we actually tell anybody we can time travel? And what really happens when we time travel? Does that body really time travel? Does it die? Where's it go? How does it skip over from point A to point B? How does it skip all over that stuff in between? A lot of technical stuff I don't know about time travel. I know that it is possible, and one day we will be doing it. I do know that old saying that anything is possible if you wait long enough. And that is very true. For most of you out there that are going, there's no way in heck that time travel will ever be possible. Well, just stop and think that 50, 60 years ago, that's what they're saying about this computer you're using today. Nothing like that will ever happen. That's only in TV and movies. So think about it. Everything becomes a reality sooner or later. It takes 5 years maybe to make it happen. Or maybe it's going to take 500. But sooner or later, it will happen. But does that make it better or worse? What's the scenario there? What's your input? Email me. Send me an IM. Let me know what your input is. If you're listening to this as a rebroadcast, let me know. It's just really kind of interesting that all this is out there that we have no clue about yet. So keep that in mind as well. And I don't know, it's just kind of a scary thought, to be honest, that time travel is getting closer and closer to reality. Everybody says space is the final frontier. I don't know if it's the final one. I think it's just the beginning for our species once we get into deep space travel. And what would happen if we get into deep space travel with a machine that also could travel through time? Because face it, time traveling in deep space is a lot easier to do than to do it on a planet. Because the further you can get away from magnetic fields and gravity, the easier it is to manipulate space and time, basically. So no matter what we can do on planet Earth itself as time travel, will probably be so small in the beginning that it may or may not be worth it for some people, but it's a start. But if we get incorporated onto a spacecraft into deep space, we could probably see leaps and bounds more rapidly than we could from the experiments that we're doing here in the labs on Earth. And who knows, maybe in 5 years, the experiments we're doing today in the labs on Earth we'll be doing in space, getting a little bit further just from the space station or one of the shuttles. Because I know deep space travel won't happen quickly. Probably won't even happen in my lifetime, which is kind of sad in a way, but that's the reality of it. But then again, if we can deep travel into space here and now, what would stop us from the future happening? I don't know. Because if we can't travel in deep space now, but we can time travel, why can't the future send us the information we need to travel in deep space now? Just something to think about. Something to do. The pros, the cons, the goods, the bads, that's all out there. Like I said, if you're just joining us, we are talking about time travel. This is RadioVisions. We're talking about time travel. And if you could change something, would you go back in time and change it? Or would you rather go to the future and see what's in the future? What is your input on this? Send me an email later on. Let me know what you think. Because this subject is very, very near and dear to me because I've been studying it ever since I was a child. Because out of all the science fiction stuff I've ever read or seen as a TV show or movie or any other form of entertainment, time travel has always stuck out to me. The space movies where we're traveling to other planets and all of that, those were okay, but time travel was more intriguing to me because I've always felt deep down inside that someday we could do it if we wanted it bad enough. Human race is really, really smart when we want to be. I mean, really, really smart when we want to be. But so many of us just don't want to be. We'd rather be complacent and have people tell us what to do instead of forging forward and making new decisions and new technologies. So, someday it will all happen. We will time travel. We will go into deep space. We will find new life forms out there. And it all comes down to what? A matter of time. So keep that in mind as well. So here we are, starting to wind down another evening of RadioVisions. If you're just joining us, this is Darrah, and we're talking about time travel and changing things. If you would you? Currently, the people that are developing time travel as we speak, you can find out more about them on YouTube because they have some stuff posted. They're using lasers to do this, and if they can actually do it, what do you think the next step will be? Give me your thoughts on that. Send me emails on it. Send me IMs on it. What will the next step be after they figure out they can time travel? Will it be to use it as a weapon? Will it be to commercialize it? Will it be to use it to rewrite history? Will it be used as a historian tool to go back and observe history as it actually happened? To go back and find out if these events actually really happened as we think they happened. Go back and watch the Egyptians actually build the pyramids to see how they did it. Or if they did it at all. You know. What will we do with this new invention? This new modes of transportation when it happens? All these questions don't have answers at the moment, but we're working on it. People like myself that are curious and keep talking to people like you that are listening, who maybe are curious about it or maybe who don't care, but after listening to this broadcast maybe go, I want to do a little more research myself to see what's out there. It's just an interesting subject to me. That's why we're talking about it tonight. And if you've read over the website, you'll know that every Friday and Saturday night that we're here, starting next week, 10:30 to midnight, that each night that we're here live, we'll have a different subject. Tonight's subject just happened to be changes and time travel. Next week, who knows what the subject will be. If you have an idea for a subject or a discussion we should have here on RadioVisions, email me the subject we should be talking about, and we will talk about them. The more subjects we get, the more interesting this will get. And the more people that participate, the more interesting it will get. So like I said, until we get things really rolling and going, we make up topics and we'll just discuss them and have a good time. I always like the input people give me, so please keep those emails coming and those IMs coming. And remember that if you produce your own music, we still need your music really, really bad. We've only got a handful of people that have gave us permission to use their music, so we need more than that. Because starting January 1st, we're going to start broadcasting music live. Well, not live, but we're going to start broadcasting music. Keep that in mind. But we do need your permission to do it. So you need to print off the permission form, mail it back to us with a CD of your music. Now, if you want to email us your music, you can email me your music, but I still need a physical release form or broadcasting form mailed to me as well, because I can't use your music unless I have that broadcasting form. So please keep that in mind. And this is a close of another weekend, another Saturday. So keep in mind that we'll be back next Friday night at 10:30 p.m. with our new hours going. And y'all have a wonderful night, and this is Darrah signing out.